Imagine waking up every night to the sound of footsteps above you. Not once, not twice, but every night. At first it's annoying, then confusing, and eventually terrifying. Because what if those sounds weren't just your house settling? What if they were a warning? This is the true crime survival story of Daniel Chun, a software analyst living in Bellevue, Washington, and how a noise most people would ignore nearly led to a tragedy, until he listened closely enough to stop it. Daniel Chun was a creature of routine. At 36, he worked remotely for a cybersecurity firm based in Seattle. His job was demanding but predictable. His townhouse, 3 floors, built in the early 2000s, was quiet, clean, and comfortably boring. Daniel liked boring. He had moved to Bellevue for the calm. Tree-lined streets, families, professionals, the kind of place where nothing unexpected ever seemed to happen. The attic sat above his 3rd-floor bedroom. He rarely thought about it until the footsteps began. It happened just after 2 a.m. Daniel was half asleep when he heard it. A dull, rhythmic sound above him. Thud. Pause. Thud. He sat up in bed, listening. The house was still. No music, no wind, no rain, just movement. Daniel told himself it was normal. Wood expands. Houses settle. Attics make noise. He rolled over and went back to sleep. That was the first mistake. The footsteps returned the next night, and the next. Always late, always slow, always deliberate. Daniel tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was raccoons. Maybe birds. Maybe heating ducts cooling unevenly. But animals don't walk in straight lines. And they don't stop then start again. If you heard footsteps above your bedroom night after night, would you investigate or convince yourself it was nothing? Be honest. Because Daniel did what most of us would do. He ignored it. After a week, Daniel installed a small motion camera in the attic entrance outside his bedroom. Not because he was scared, at least that's what he told himself, but because he worked in security. Trust data, he believed. The next morning, he checked the footage. Nothing. No motion detected. No alerts. That should have reassured him. Instead, it made his stomach twist, because he knew what he had heard. By the 2nd week, the footsteps changed. They no longer wandered. They followed the same route. Back and forth, as if someone was measuring something. Daniel started sleeping with the lights on. He checked locks obsessively. Still no proof. One morning, Daniel noticed something small. The attic access panel wasn't fully flush with the ceiling anymore, just slightly off. He climbed a ladder and pushed it closed. That night, the footsteps stopped. For one night. Then they returned, louder than before. Almost impatient. Daniel's townhouse shared a wall with Mark Reynolds, a man in his late 40s who lived alone. Mark had moved in 6 months earlier and kept himself mostly.
Mark complained about noise that didn't exist. Parking spots Daniel never used. Trash bins being an inch too far left. When Daniel casually mentioned the attic noises one afternoon, Mark's reaction was strange. Probably just old wiring. Mark said quickly. Too quickly. Attics make noise. Daniel nodded, but noticed Mark didn't meet his eyes. The footsteps grew worse. Heavier. Closer. Daniel finally went into the attic during the day. It was empty. No animals. No damage. No insulation trails. But there was something else. Footprints in the dust. Human footprints. Leading toward the shared wall. Would you call the police immediately? Confront your neighbor? Or assume you were misinterpreting things? Daniel hesitated. That hesitation almost cost lives. Days later, Daniel found Mark in the shared backyard, staring up at the roofline. "You been up there?" Mark asked. Daniel's heart skipped. "In the attic?" Daniel replied. "Why would I be?" Mark shrugged. "Just asking." The conversation escalated fast. Accusations. Raised voices. Daniel mentioned the footprints. Mark laughed. Too loud, too forced. "Maybe you should mind your own house," he snapped. Police were eventually called, not for violence, but a documented dispute. No arrests, no charges, but something changed. Mark stopped complaining, stopped watching, stopped existing, and that silence was worse than the noise. That night, the footsteps returned, but this time, they weren't pacing. They were stacking, metal scraping, wood shifting, weight settling. Daniel sat frozen in bed, heart pounding, as the realization hit him. Whatever was happening above him was almost finished. Daniel Chun did not sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed, lights on, phone in his hand, listening as the sounds above him continued, slow, methodical, deliberate. Whatever was happening in the attic was no longer wandering or testing. It was being completed. The noises stopped just before 4 a.m. That silence felt heavier than the footsteps had ever been. At sunrise, Daniel called the non-emergency police line. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't panic. He explained the timeline, the repeated footsteps, the footprints, the confrontation with his neighbor, the shared wall, the sudden escalation. 2 officers arrived an hour later. They listened politely, but skepticism was clear. Attics creak. Neighbors argue. Footsteps get misinterpreted. Still, one officer, Detective Laura Martinez, asked to see the attic. Daniel climbed the ladder first. The attic looked almost exactly as it had before. Almost. Then Detective Martinez noticed something Daniel had missed. The insulation had been disturbed. Not randomly, but cleared in straight lines. Boards had been shifted to expose sections of framing. Wires had been moved aside carefully, not chewed or torn. This wasn't an animal. This was planning. Then they found it. Not what it was, but where it was. Installed directly above the shared wall. Anchored. Hidden. Waiting. Detective Martinez immediately ordered the house evacuated. Daniel stood in the street, watching his home being sealed off, realizing something with chilling clarity. The footsteps weren't haunting him. They were counting down. Police went next door. Mark Reynolds didn't answer. His car was gone. His house was empty. Too empty. Drawers cleared. Electronics missing. No personal photos. It looked less like someone stepping out, and more like someone fleeing. By midday, federal authorities arrived. The townhouse block was evacuated entirely. Bomb technicians entered Daniel's attic in full protective gear. Daniel wasn't told details, but he didn't need them. The expressions on their faces said enough. Investigators later explained everything to Daniel in fragments. Mark Reynolds had been under quiet investigation months earlier for extremist online activity. Nothing actionable, just enough to keep him on a watch list. He had chosen Daniel's townhouse for one reason: access. The shared attic space allowed him to install something dangerous without entering Daniel's living area. Something designed to cause catastrophic damage, not just to one home, but to the entire connected row. The footsteps weren't random. They were measurements, weight tests, final adjustments. Daniel had been sleeping beneath a disaster. The most unsettling detail came later. Investigators believed the plan was nearly complete, but not finished. Mark needed one final night, one final adjustment, one final test. Daniel's confrontation, the police report over the fence dispute, and the sudden attention had disrupted the timeline. The footsteps became frantic, then precise, then stopped. Mark left because he knew he had been noticed. Mark Reynolds was arrested 2 days later in Yakima, Washington, during a traffic stop. He didn't resist. He didn't deny being in the attic. He claimed he was preventing something worse. But evidence told another story. Footage from nearby hardware stores, receipts, digital communications, blueprints saved on a wiped laptop, recovered anyway. The attic had not been a hiding place. It had been a staging area. Daniel was allowed back into his home a week later. The attic was sealed permanently, the shared wall reinforced. The Townhouse Association installed new security measures. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling. Every creak felt deliberate. Every sound carried weight. Sleep didn't come easily anymore. Daniel struggled in ways he hadn't expected. He wasn't injured. Nothing had exploded. Yet his sense of safety was gone. He startled at footsteps in public places, avoided shared spaces, checked ceilings instinctively. Therapists later explained it simply. Your brain knows you survived. Your body hasn't caught up yet. News spread quickly. Neighbors who once waved politely now avoided eye contact, ashamed they hadn't noticed anything strange. Some admitted they heard noises too. They just assumed it was someone else's problem. That realization haunted Daniel more than the attic ever had. Mark Reynolds was charged with multiple federal offenses. He never testified, never explained, never showed remorse. Experts described him as methodical, patient, and detached, exactly like the footsteps Daniel had heard. Months later, Daniel moved, not because the house was unsafe, but because he couldn't forget what listening had revealed. Before leaving, he stood one last time beneath the attic hatch. Quiet, still, no footsteps, and for the first time, that silence felt earned. This story isn't about paranoia. It's about attention, about how ordinary sounds, ignored, rationalized, dismissed, can sometimes be the only warning you'll ever get. Daniel Chin didn't survive because he was brave. He survived because he Lee. Stennett. If you want more true crime survival stories where small details prevent massive tragedies, subscribe to this channel. More stories are coming.